The first time I noticed something odd, it was small, a pebble in my shoe. She'd left her laptop open, a rarity, and when I walked by, I caught a glimpse of a tab labeled Venmo Transactions. It wasn't the tab itself that caught my eye, but the names. Daniel, Marco, Jeff, all with vague captions like, "Thanks for your help," or "Great seeing you," followed by emoji hearts. I lingered by the door, my mind wrestling with the image. Harmless, I told myself. Friends, maybe old coworkers. But that pebble wouldn't leave. A week later, it was a dinner reservation. She rarely worked late twice in 1 week. Yet there she was, dressed like she was heading to a gala. I joked, "Big client tonight?" She laughed, a little too hard, and kissed me on the cheek. "It's business, babe. You know how it is." Except I didn't. Not like this. My gut twisted as I watched her leave, the scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway. I felt like a dog chasing its own tail, running in circles around my thoughts. Was I being paranoid? Jealous? Then came the day her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She was upstairs. I wasn't snooping, but the notification lit up the screen. "Your match has sent you a message." Match? My heart raced. My hand hovered over the phone, trembling. I shouldn't. I really shouldn't. But I couldn't not. Not now. With a deep breath, I unlocked it. The app was right there. A sleek black and gold icon I'd never seen before. Click. Her profile stared back at me, glamorous and confident, like a stranger wearing her face. She wasn't selling financial advice. She was selling herself. I scrolled through her pictures. Her in a red dress I didn't recognize, sipping champagne on a balcony I'd never visited. The bio was simple, seductive, successful, and ambitious. Looking for connections that spark. I wanted to stop, to throw the phone across the room, but I couldn't look away. The messages were worse. Explicit, playful, transactional. I read one from a man named Richard, offering to spoil her in exchange for her company over dinner. Another thanked her for a memorable night. My chest felt hollow, like my heart had been scooped out and replaced with ice. I heard her footsteps upstairs and snapped the phone shut, shoving it back onto the counter. I paced the kitchen, my mind a storm of disbelief and rage. Confront her now? No, she'd deny it. She'd find a way to turn it back on me, to make me feel crazy. But staying silent felt unbearable. I sat down, staring at the floor. She'd been lying to me. Not just lying, but weaving a life I knew nothing about. One where I was a footnote in the margins of her story. I didn't know if I wanted to scream, cry, or curl into a ball and disappear. When she came downstairs, she was glowing, phone in hand, smiling at something on the screen. She looked at me and frowned. "You okay? You look pale." I forced a smile that felt like it would crack my face in half. "Yeah, just tired." But inside, I was screaming. Who was she texting? What lie would she tell next? The woman standing in front of me wasn't my wife, not the one I thought I knew. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her, make her tell me the truth. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed proof. That night, as she slept beside me, I scoured her laptop. The browser history was clean, wiped down to the hour, but the email was another story. I found confirmation emails for reservations, payments, even receipts for lingerie I'd never seen. Everything pointed to a life I hadn't been invited to, a life built on deceit. I stared at her, peaceful and unsuspecting, her breathing steady in the dark. How long had she been lying to me? How had I missed it? The love I felt for her tangled with anger, like a rope cutting into my skin. By dawn, I had pieced together enough to know this wasn't paranoia or a misunderstanding. This was betrayal, plain and sharp. The woman I loved had carved out a secret life, one I wasn't meant to see. I didn't confront her that morning. Instead, I made coffee, kissed her on the cheek, and told her to have a good day. My hands were steady, my voice calm, but inside, something was breaking. As she left, I whispered to myself, not yet, but soon. The next step was clear. I'd follow her. The house felt different after that night, like its walls had absorbed the lies. I woke up to the sound of her humming in the shower, and the normalcy of it all sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. For a moment, I thought maybe I could pretend I didn't know. Just carry on, oblivious, like I had been. Ignorance was easier, wasn't it? But then the images came rushing back. Her profile on that app, the messages, the receipts. It wasn't ignorance anymore. It was cowardice. I spent the morning in a fog, avoiding her as she flitted around the kitchen, texting with a grin that made my blood boil. I couldn't stop imagining who was on the other side of that screen. Richard? Marco? Someone new? Busy day today? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced up, her smile flickering for just a second. Yeah, a few client calls. Might head out later for a meeting. There it was again. That polished lie, delivered so effortlessly. I nodded, fighting back every urge to confront her right then. Not yet. I needed something concrete, something she couldn't explain away. By noon, she was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The silence in the house was oppressive, pressing against my chest as I paced the living room. I couldn't just sit there anymore, so I went to her office, the place she'd claimed as her workspace. Her desk was immaculate, almost suspiciously so. No papers, no notebooks, nothing that suggested the hustle of a real business. Just a laptop and a few pins neatly lined up in a cup. I opened the laptop, my hands trembling as I typed in the password, my birthday. It felt cruel that she hadn't even bothered to change it. The desktop was clean, but a folder buried in the documents section caught my eye. Expenses. Inside were spreadsheets, each labeled by month. I opened the most recent one, my heart pounding louder with every second. The entries weren't business expenses. They were luxury items, dinners at high-end restaurants, five-star hotel stays, designer clothes. Each one was accompanied by vague notes like client appreciation or meeting supplies. Meeting supplies? For $1,200? The key revelation hit me when I scrolled to the bottom of the sheet and saw the last line item. Payment from RJ, $5,000. My stomach turned. Payment for what? I didn't need to guess. The room spun as I stood up, my breath ragged. I looked around her office, searching for something, anything, that might explain this away. But all I found were more lies. Her client notes were just printed itineraries for her dates, times, locations, and even reminders to bring a small gift. The reality of it crushed me, like the ground had fallen out from beneath my feet. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late at work, the sacrifices I'd made so we could have a good life. And this was what she'd done with it? But as the pain twisted in my chest, another emotion began to rise, anger. Not the kind that burns out quickly, but a deep, simmering rage that demands action. I slammed the laptop shut and paced the room, adrenaline coursing through me. I couldn't stay passive any longer. I needed to see it for myself. If she was meeting someone today, I would follow her. Confronting her without proof might give her room to lie again, and I wasn't giving her that chance. The timing was perfect, or maybe I was just desperate to act. She'd left her itinerary out in the open, tucked in the back of a drawer. It was clear as day. Dinner, 7 p.m., the Orchid Room. By the time evening rolled around, I was sitting in my car across the street from the restaurant, the crisp air biting at my face through the cracked window. My pulse thudded in my ears as I spotted her stepping out of a cab. She looked stunning, too stunning for a casual business meeting. The red dress hugged her figure, her heels clicking confidently against the pavement. I waited until she disappeared inside before stepping out of my car. The brisk air did nothing to calm me. My fists clenched as I crossed the street, every step fueled by the weight of her betrayal. As I approached the entrance, I hesitated. Part of me was screaming to turn back, to leave this confrontation for another day. But I couldn't. Not after everything I'd seen. I pushed through the door, scanning the room until I found her in the back corner. She was seated at a table for two, smiling at a man who looked like he'd just stepped out of a Forbes photo shoot. His hand rested lightly on hers, and she didn't pull away. My vision tunneled. The noise of the restaurant faded. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to act, but I forced myself to stay composed. I had to do this right. I walked toward the table, each step deliberate. When I reached them, I paused, letting the tension build. "Am I interrupting?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. The man looked confused, glancing between us. "I think we need to talk," I said, dropping her laptop onto the table with a sharp thud. "Now." The color drained from her face, and for the first time, she had no words. And that's when I realized I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The air in the house felt charged, like the moments before a storm. She wasn't home yet, and that gave me the time I needed. Time to think, to plan. But thinking wasn't the problem. It was the swarm of emotions twisting inside me like a nest of angry hornets. Anger, hurt, fear. Her laptop sat on the kitchen counter, silent but damning. I'd already seen enough to know the truth, but knowing wasn't enough anymore. I needed something she couldn't explain away. Something that would lay bare the reality of what she'd done. Not just for me, but for her. I picked up her phone. She'd left it behind for once, probably assuming I'd never dare to touch it. She underestimated me. Unlocking it was easy. I knew her passcode, our anniversary. The irony stung as I tapped the numbers and watched the home screen spring to life. I started with her messages, scrolling through dozens of mundane conversations. Friends, family, nothing suspicious until I hit the app, the one she'd been using to sell herself. Her inbox was a minefield of transactions and rendezvous, each message more revolting than the last. But one thread stood out. RJ, the man who'd paid her $5,000. Their chats were more than just logistics. They were personal, familiar. "Can't wait to see you again. Same place?" Of course. Always a pleasure. They weren't just strangers exchanging money for time. This was ongoing, regular. My grip tightened on the phone as I scrolled further, piecing together months of deceit. I wasn't just losing her to some faceless string of clients. There were roots here, connections she'd nurtured while letting our marriage wither. I should have stopped there. I already had enough proof to end things. But something about the way she saved his messages felt calculated, like she wanted to keep him close. Then I found it, a gallery hidden behind a password-protected app. It took me a few tries, but I got in. The photos made my stomach churn. Pictures of them together, smiling, arms draped around each other like a couple in love. There she was, wearing a dress I'd never seen, sitting on the balcony of a luxury hotel. Him beside her, holding a champagne flute. One image hit harder than the rest. It was her holding a gift box, grinning at the camera while RJ's hand rested on her thigh. Inside the box was a diamond bracelet, the same one she'd worn to our anniversary dinner a few months ago. I slammed the phone down, the sound echoing in the empty house. It was worse than I'd thought. She wasn't just cheating. She was living an entirely different life, one where I didn't exist. The weight of it all pressed down on me. I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in the truth of what she'd done. Every memory we'd built together now felt like a cruel joke. The vacations, the nights we spent talking about our dreams, the promises we'd made. And yet, a part of me still hesitated. Did I want to destroy her life the way she destroyed mine? Was I ready to face what came next? Divorce, questions from friends and family, the endless ache of being alone. But then I thought of the photos, the messages, the lies. She'd made her choice, hadn't she? This wasn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. This was deliberate, calculated. My chest tightened as the realization hit me. I wasn't just fighting for answers anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, for my future. I grabbed her phone and sent the photos to my own device, saving every shred of evidence I could find. My hands shook, but not from fear, from resolve. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. Just as I finished, I heard her key in the front door. My heart pounded as the door creaked open, her footsteps light and unbothered. "Hey," she called out. "You home?" I didn't respond. Instead, I slipped the phone back onto the counter and stood in the shadow of the living room, watching her move through the kitchen. She was humming again, like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. I stepped forward, my voice steady but cold. "We need to talk." She turned, startled, her eyes searching mine for clues. For a moment, I saw a flicker of panic before she covered it with her usual smile. "Oh," she said, playing innocent. "What's up?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing with the evidence I'd just uncovered. Her face dropped. "Sit down," I said, and for the first time, she listened. She sat across from me, her face pale and drawn. For the first time in years, she wasn't the confident, polished woman who always seemed to have the perfect answer. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, and when she opened her mouth, her voice trembled. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, her words rushing out too quickly. "I can explain." "Explain?" My jaw tightened, and I felt the knot of anger and hurt twisting deeper in my chest. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her like I was trying to decipher a stranger. "Go on, then," I said. "Explain." Her gaze darted to the phone on the table between us, the glaring evidence of her betrayal, and back to me. It's not serious. It's business. That's all it is. Nothing emotional. Nothing real." Her words landed like stones in a deep well, echoing through the hollow space inside me. Nothing emotional? Nothing real? That's what she called this? I thought about the pictures, the messages, the bracelet she wore like a trophy. She wanted me to believe this was transactional, meaningless. But it wasn't meaningless to me. "Business?" I asked, my voice low and cold. "You expect me to believe this is some kind of networking opportunity?" She flinched, her mask of composure cracking. "It started that way. I swear. I was just trying to help us out financially. You've been working so hard, and I thought—" "Don't," I interrupted, the sharpness of my voice startling even me. "Don't put this on me. You weren't doing this for us. You were doing this for you." She didn't deny it. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. I picked up her phone again, scrolling through the messages with RJ. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. She hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. "How long?" I repeated, louder this time. "Over a year," she finally whispered. "A year." My mind reeled. This wasn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. This was deliberate, calculated. She'd been living a double life for an entire year while I'd been blind, trusting, oblivious. And then she said something that stopped me cold. "It's not just him." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Not just him. My stomach churned, my vision narrowing as I tried to process what she meant. "There were others," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But I ended those. It's just RJ now. He's different." Different. The words slammed into me like a freight train. She wasn't just cheating. She was invested. The room seemed to tilt, the weight of her confession pressing down on me. I thought I'd already seen the worst of it, but this new revelation opened a door to something darker. This wasn't just infidelity. This was an entire life I didn't know about. And yet, as much as I wanted to scream, to rage, to break something, a strange calm settled over me. Maybe it was the numbness of knowing I'd lost her long before tonight. Maybe it was the clarity that came with finally understanding what I was up against. She wasn't going to stop. Not on her own. "I see," I said quietly, standing up from the table. She looked up at me, confused, as I grabbed her phone in my own. "What are you doing?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "I'm giving you space," I said, "to figure out what you really want." Her brow furrowed, her mouth opening to argue, but I didn't wait for her response. I walked upstairs, grabbed a bag, and started packing. As I shoved clothes into the duffel, my mind raced. This wasn't over. I wasn't going to let her get away with turning our life into a lie. But I needed time to think, to regroup. She might have been planning her moves for a year, but I wasn't going to roll over and let her win. Before I left, I stood at the doorway, looking back at her. She was still sitting at the table, staring down at her hands. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady. "I'm going to be gone for a while. And when I come back, I'm going to have a plan. You've had your secrets long enough. Now it's my turn." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, but I didn't wait for her reply. I stepped out the door, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. As I walked to my car, a strange sense of resolve settled over me. I didn't know what my next move would be, not exactly. But I knew one thing for sure. I was done playing the victim. She thought she had control of this game, but I was about to change the rules. The hotel room was cold, sterile, the kind of place meant for passing through, not staying. I hadn't brought much with me, a duffel bag of clothes, my laptop, her phone, everything else I'd left behind, not knowing if I'd ever want to go back. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in my hand. Her phone. It felt like a living thing, humming with all the secrets it held. I'd spent the last hour scrolling through her messages and photos, rereading every word, every promise she'd made to these men. The more I read, the less I recognized the woman I'd married. How could she do this? To me? To us? But the question I couldn't shake, the one that burrowed deepest, was why I still cared. After everything I'd uncovered, I should hate her. I should want to burn every memory we ever shared. But instead, I felt hollow, empty, like all the love I'd ever felt for her had been siphoned out, leaving behind nothing but ashes. Or maybe not nothing. Maybe there was still something there, flickering faintly, refusing to be extinguished. And that was the worst part. The knock at the door startled me. My first instinct was panic. Had she followed me? Did she know where I'd gone? I wasn't ready to see her, not yet. When I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was the hotel manager, holding a piece of paper. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "This was left at the front desk for you." I frowned, taking the envelope. There was no name on it, no indication of who had sent it. I tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The note was typed, brief, and chilling. "She's been lying to you for longer than you think. Check the storage unit." I blinked at the words, my pulse quickening. Storage unit? What storage unit? I asked the manager who'd left the note, but he just shrugged. "A man dropped it off. Said you'd know what it meant." I didn't, but I couldn't ignore it. An hour later, I was standing in front of a nondescript storage facility on the other side of town, clutching the spare key I'd found in her desk drawer. I'd seen the key a dozen times before, never giving it a second thought. Now, it felt like a key to Pandora's box. The storage unit smelled faintly of mildew and dust. The overhead light buzzed, flickering occasionally, as I stepped inside. My stomach churned with every step. It wasn't the chaos I'd expected. Everything was neatly organized, too neatly. Boxes labeled, work supplies. A garment rack holding clothes I'd never seen her wear. But then I found the suitcase. It was tucked in the back corner, out of sight. My hands shook as I unzipped it, revealing stacks of envelopes, each one labeled with a man's name. Inside were printed photos, receipts, and cash. So much cash. My chest tightened as I flipped through the photos. Her with different men, in different places. A montage of a life I'd never been part of. But then something caught my eye. A familiar face. RJ wasn't just one of her clients. I recognized him now, from our wedding. He was her friend. Or at least that's what she told me. He'd toasted us that day, called me the luckiest man alive. My vision blurred as rage surged through me. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a betrayal that cut so much deeper. She'd been lying to me from the very beginning. As I drove back to the hotel, the suitcase in the trunk, my mind raced. The anger I'd felt before had been sharp and blinding. But this was different. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me. I'd spent so much time trying to figure her out, trying to piece together why she'd done this, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I needed, what I deserved. The truth was clear now. She wasn't the woman I thought she was, and maybe she never had been. I pulled into the hotel parking lot and sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the dashboard. The weight of what I'd discovered settled heavily on my shoulders. But there was something else, too, a strange, almost liberating sense of clarity. I wasn't going to let her lies define me. As I stepped out of the car, I left the suitcase behind, locking it in the trunk. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of control. She had secrets. So did I now. And I wasn't done yet. The suitcase sat between us on the living room floor, an unspoken challenge. I had brought it in without a word, her face tightening the moment she saw it. She didn't ask what it was. She didn't need to. "Want to tell me about this?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Her eyes darted to the suitcase, then back to me, and for a brief second, I saw it, fear. But just as quickly, she masked it with feigned confusion. "What is that?" "You tell me," I said, unzipping it and pulling out one of the envelopes. Because it sure as hell doesn't look like financial planning. She crossed her arms, her voice laced with brittle defiance. You went through my things? That's a serious invasion of privacy, you know? Privacy? I snapped, the word bitter on my tongue. You're worried about privacy when you've been lying to my face for years? Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. I took a step closer, holding up the envelope with RJ's name on it. How long have you been running this operation? And don't insult me with another lie. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time, she looked genuinely weary. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she muttered, almost to herself. Then what was it supposed to be? I pressed. She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the suitcase again. At first, it really was about money, she admitted. I was just trying to help. Things were tight, and you were working so much, and I thought, don't you dare make this about me, I interrupted, my voice rising. You think this is how you help? By sneaking around and lying? By bringing him into our lives? Her face paled. She knew exactly who I meant. I tossed the envelope onto the coffee table, its contents spilling out, a photo of her and RJ, laughing over cocktails. How long has he been in the picture? Since before the wedding? Her silence was answer enough. The anger that had been simmering beneath my skin boiled over. I grabbed my phone and began scrolling through my contacts. What are you doing? She asked, her voice sharp with panic. Calling him, I said flatly. Her eyes widened, and she stepped toward me, reaching for the phone. You don't need to do that. Oh, I think I do, I said, stepping back. He's been a part of this for long enough. Don't you think it's time he answered some questions? Stop, she shouted, her voice breaking. Please, just stop. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. The desperation in her voice was new, raw. She wasn't trying to defend herself anymore. She was pleading. Why shouldn't I? I asked, my tone cold. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Because it'll ruin everything, she whispered. Everything's already ruined. I shot back. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and shining with unshed tears. You don't understand. It's not just him. There's more. If you start digging, you're not going to like what you find. Her words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. A cold chill ran down my spine. I lowered the phone slowly, my mind racing. More? What the hell else could there be? She didn't say anything else, just sat there staring at me, her expression a mix of fear and resignation. It wasn't guilt that made her look that way. It was something darker. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to walk away, to stop before I uncovered something even worse. But I couldn't. Not now. I guess we'll find out, I said, grabbing the suitcase and heading for the door. Where are you going? She called after me, panic creeping back into her voice. To find out exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes, I said without looking back. And with that, I stepped into the night, the suitcase in my hand and her lies still echoing in my ears. I sat in my car outside the storage facility, the suitcase open on the passenger seat. The contents mocked me, envelopes stuffed with cash, printed itineraries, and pictures that told a story I hadn't been a part of. Her life had become a labyrinth of secrets, and I'd spent far too long wandering in the dark. But now I had a light. My chest felt tight as I gripped the steering wheel, the weight of everything threatening to crush me. Every emotion I'd been cycling through, betrayal, anger, sadness, swirled together into something sharper, something more focused. Enough was enough. I couldn't let her lies dictate my life anymore. If I wanted the truth, I had to go after it myself. And I knew exactly where to start. RJ's office was in a sleek downtown building, the kind of place that screamed wealth and power. I parked across the street, watching the revolving doors spin like clockwork, churning out suits and stilettos. I didn't belong here, but that didn't matter. The receptionist didn't even look up when I walked in, too busy tapping away on her keyboard. I approached the desk, gripping the suitcase tightly. Can I help you? She asked without lifting her gaze. I'm here to see RJ, I said, my voice steady. Do you have an appointment? No, I said, meeting her disinterested tone with cold resolve. But he'll want to see me. Her eyes flicked up then, narrowing slightly. I'm sorry, but Mr. RJ doesn't take unscheduled meetings. Tell him it's about his arrangement with my wife, I said, enunciating every word carefully. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she just stared at me. Then, without a word, she picked up the phone, murmuring something I couldn't hear. A few tense minutes later, a man in an impeccably tailored suit appeared. He was tall, clean-shaven, and exuded the kind of confidence that comes with never being told no. "Can I help you?" he asked, his smile tight and practiced. "You're RJ," I said. It wasn't a question. His smile faltered slightly. "I am. And you are?" I stepped forward, lifting the suitcase between us. "The husband of the woman you've been buying." The tension in the air thickened. For a moment, RJ just stared at the suitcase, his expression unreadable. Then he motioned for me to follow him. "Let's discuss this somewhere private," he said coolly. We entered a glass-walled conference room, and he closed the door behind us. I set the suitcase on the table and unzipped it, spilling its contents. "I want answers," I said, my voice hard. "How long has this been going on? And don't even think about lying to me." RJ looked at the photos, the cash, the receipts, and let out a slow breath. "Look," he said, leaning against the table. "I'm not going to pretend this is something it's not. Your wife and I, we've had an arrangement, but it's not what you think." I slammed my fist on the table, making him flinch. "Don't patronize me. I know what this is." "No," he said firmly, his eyes meeting mine. "You don't. She's not just doing this for money. She's been playing a long game." "What the hell does that mean?" I demanded. RJ hesitated, then leaned closer. "You think you're the victim here, but so am I. She's been using both of us." His words hit like a punch to the gut. "Explain," I growled. "She's not just after money," he said, his voice low. "She's been gathering information. On me. On my business. And now I'm wondering if she's done the same to you." The room spun for a moment as I processed his words. Was this more than just infidelity? Could she have been using me, too? I stood there, staring at RJ, my mind racing. He looked genuine, or at least as genuine as a man like him could look. But I couldn't trust him. I couldn't trust anyone right now. "She's not the woman you think she is," he said, his tone almost apologetic. "But I think you already know that." I grabbed the suitcase and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "This isn't over," I said without looking back. As I stepped out into the night, one thought burned in my mind. If she'd been playing us both, what was her endgame? And how far was I willing to go to find out? The drive back from RJ's office was a blur. His words kept circling in my head, crashing into the questions I couldn't answer. "She's not just after money. She's been playing a long game." I wanted to dismiss it as self-serving garbage, the kind of thing a man like him says to save face. But the look in his eyes when he said it, the flicker of fear, of betrayal, it was too familiar. As much as I hated him, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was telling the truth. And if he was, what the hell had I been married to? By the time I reached the house, my hands were gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The front porch light was on, a beacon of normalcy that felt like an insult. I sat there for a long moment, the engine idling, trying to decide if I could walk through that door without losing control. No more waiting. No more passive anger. I needed answers. And tonight, I was going to get them. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, slicing vegetables for a dinner she hadn't told me about. The mundane scene made my blood boil. How could she act like everything was fine when our entire life was built on lies? "Where have you been?" she asked, glancing up. Her tone was casual, but her eyes lingered on me, scanning for clues. "Downtown," I said flatly. "Had an interesting conversation." Her knife paused mid-slice. "Oh? With who?" "RJ," I said, letting the name hang in the air like a bomb. Her face paled for just a second, so quick I almost missed it, but her hands kept working, steady as ever. "I don't know why you talk to him." "Don't you?" I snapped, stepping closer. "You've been using him, just like you've been using me." Her knife clattered against the cutting board as she turned to face me fully. "What are you talking about?" "You tell me," I said, pulling the envelope with RJ's name out of the suitcase. I tossed it onto the counter, the photos spilling out. Her eyes flicked to them, her jaw tightening. "I'm done with the lies," I said, my voice rising. "You've been manipulating him, haven't you? And me. For what? Money? Revenge? Or is this all some game to you?" Her expression hardened, the fear replaced by something colder. "You don't understand. Then make me understand," I shouted, slamming my fist on the counter. "Because I'm running out of reasons not to walk out that door and never come back." For a long moment, she said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, with a deep breath, she leaned against the counter, her shoulders sagging. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she said softly. "Go this far?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You've been lying to me for years. You've built an entire second life behind my back. How far was it supposed to go?" She hesitated, then said, "It started as a way to protect us. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth. RJ wasn't just a client. He was an opportunity. He has connections, power. I thought I could leverage him." "Leverage him for what?" I asked, the heat in my voice giving way to something colder. "What could you possibly need from him that you couldn't tell me about?" Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something raw and vulnerable in them. "There are things you don't know about me," she said quietly, "about who I was before we met." "Then tell me," I demanded. She shook her head, looking away. "You won't believe me. And if you do, you'll wish you hadn't asked." The room went still, the air heavy with unspoken truths. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of her confession. There was more to this than greed or infidelity, something darker, more calculated. I stepped back, my chest heaving with the effort of holding myself together. "If you want me to stay, you'll tell me everything," I said, my voice steady but ice cold. "No more lies. No more half-truths. If there's something you're hiding, now's your chance to come clean." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move, didn't speak. "Fine," I said, grabbing the suitcase. "Then I'll find out on my own." "Wait," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, just—" But I was already walking out the door. As I stepped into the night, her sobs echoing behind me, one thought consumed me. If she wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd dig it out myself. And whatever I found, I was ready to face it. The morning light filtered through the blinds of my new apartment, cutting sharp lines across the walls. The suitcase sat in the corner, its contents untouched since I'd left the house. I hadn't needed to open it again. I already knew what was inside. It was a relic now, a reminder of the wreckage I was walking away from. For the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel so heavy. The anger, the betrayal, they were still there, coiled deep in my chest, but they didn't feel like they owned me anymore. I wasn't a victim. Not anymore. I'd spent so much time looking for answers, chasing her lies, trying to understand how everything had unraveled. But now, sitting in the quiet, I realized I didn't need to understand her. I needed to understand myself. I trusted too blindly, loved too deeply without asking questions. I'd ignored the warning signs because it was easier to believe in the version of her I wanted to see. That wasn't love. It was denial. It wasn't just her betrayal I was leaving behind. It was the version of me who had allowed it to happen. The meeting was my idea. I texted her that morning, telling her we needed to talk one last time. No accusations, no demands, just closure. We met in a quiet park, the kind of place where people walked dogs and jogged in the early hours. She was already sitting on a bench when I arrived, her face drawn and tired. The sight of her stirred something in me, but it wasn't love. Not anymore. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, sitting down at the other end of the bench. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I didn't think you'd want to see me again." "I didn't," I admitted. "But I need to say this. For me." She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed but searching. "Okay." I took a deep breath. "I loved you. I really did. And I think, in your own way, you loved me too. But whatever we had, it's gone now. It's been gone for a long time. Tears welled in her eyes, but she stayed silent. I'm not angry anymore, I continued, surprising even myself with the truth of it. I don't want revenge. I don't even want answers. I just want to move on. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. No more excuses. No more explanations. Let's just let this be the end. For a moment, we sat in silence. The only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Then she nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I'm sorry, she whispered. I stood, the weight of her apology lifting something inside me. Take care of yourself, I said simply, and walked away without looking back. The first thing I did when I got home was open the suitcase. I spread its contents across the floor, each envelope and photo a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. One by one, I fed them into the shredder, watching as the lies turned to ribbons. When it was done, I sat back and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It felt like exhaling the past, like finally letting go. I grabbed my phone and opened a new email draft. To my lawyer. The subject line was simple, divorce papers. After I hit send, I stood by the window, watching the world outside. The sun was climbing higher now, its light brighter, warmer. For the first time in a long time, it felt like it was shining just for me. I didn't know what came next, but I wasn't afraid. I'd lost so much, but I'd found something too. Myself. I turned from the window, ready to start unpacking, not just my belongings, but my life. This was my chance to rebuild, not as a man betrayed, but as a man reborn. As I picked up the first box, a small smile tugged at my lips. This was only the beginning. The beach was empty, save for the rhythmic crash of waves and the call of gulls circling overhead. I hadn't planned to come here, but my feet seemed to know the way. This place had always felt like a refuge, a space where the noise in my head could finally quiet. Sitting on the sand, I closed my eyes and let the salty breeze wash over me. The weight I'd carried for so long felt lighter now, like a stone worn smooth by time. I thought about the man I'd been just weeks ago. Angry, broken, desperate for answers. That version of me was still here, but smaller, like a shadow fading in the sunlight. I'd lost so much. The love I thought was unshakable. The life I believed was mine. But in losing it, I'd found something I hadn't even realized was missing. Myself? I wasn't the same man anymore, and I didn't want to be. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring. It was simple, a plain gold band that had once felt like the weight of forever. Now, it felt like an artifact from a life I no longer lived. I turned it over in my hand, tracing the smooth metal with my thumb. This ring had symbolized promises we'd made, dreams we'd shared. But now, it was just a relic of something that no longer existed. Standing, I walked to the edge of the water, the cool foam curling around my feet. For a moment, I hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, I let it go, watching as the ring disappeared beneath the waves. It wasn't an act of bitterness. It wasn't anger. It was freedom. As I walked back up the beach, the horizon stretched wide and open before me. I wasn't sure where I was headed, but for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. It felt like possibility. I pulled out my phone and opened a blank note, the cursor blinking expectantly. At the top, I typed, things I want to do. I smiled as the list began to take shape. Simple things, small steps. Rebuilding relationships I'd neglected. Pursuing dreams I'd put on hold. Trying things I'd never dared to before. Each word felt like a seed planted in fresh soil, a promise to myself that the future would be mine to shape. As I walked back to my car, I paused to take one last look at the ocean, its endless expanse a reminder of how vast life could be. I wasn't tied to the past anymore. The pain was still there, yes, but it was a part of me now. Not a wound, but a scar. A testament to survival. Sliding into the driver's seat, I started the engine and turned onto the road. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. And for the first time in years, I was ready.